Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world of aching joints, freezing nights, and armor that smells worse than the horse you rode in on. Being a medieval knight wasn't glamorous. It was exhausting, filthy, and wildly overrated. If you enjoy this kind of historically accurate suffering, go ahead and like the video and subscribe. But only if you mean it. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. Now dim the lights, turn on a fan, and let's head into the mud together. Imagine waking up to the sound of your own armor falling on your face. That's how Sir Osric of Grendale begins his day, with a loud metallic clatter and the distinct taste of rust. Welcome to knighthood, circa 1374. Hope you like bruises with your breakfast. Now, let's set the scene. You're lying on a wooden bench in a stone chamber that, despite being inside a castle, feels suspiciously colder than the outdoors. That's because castles in the 14th century weren't the lavish luxury bunkers you've seen in movies. They were essentially fortified refrigerators made of rock and regret. The walls are thick, the windows are non-existent, and the draft has ambitions of joining the clergy, because it never stops preaching to your bare feet. Sir Osric rolls out of bed, one joint at a time. At 36, he's practically ancient by medieval knight standards, meaning he has two good fingers left and a spine that sounds like someone snapping kindling every time he bends. His bed? A straw-stuffed sack over a wood plank, which is currently hosting an enthusiastic colony of lice. First order of business, hygiene, which, in this case, means splashing his face with a basin of water so cold it could forge steel. There's no soap, just a communal cloth that's been used by 3 squires, 1 stable boy, and possibly a dog. Congratulations, you're now cleaner than yesterday. Barely. Dressing is less slipping into something comfortable and more a one-man wrestling match with 60 pounds of chainmail. But Osric has help. Enter Cedric, his long-suffering squire, age 15, with the strength of a damp quail and the fashion sense of a goose in molting season. It takes the two of them a solid half-hour to lace, buckle, tie, and strap the knight into something resembling battle readiness. By the end, Osric can no longer touch his toes, breathe deeply, or remember why he became a knight in the first place. Historical curiosity pill. A full suit of armor in the 1300s weighed around 45 to 60 pounds. Knights trained from youth to fight while wearing it, or at least not pass out while standing still. Now properly clanked together like a medieval tin man, Osric trudges down the great hall stairs to breakfast. His steps echo like a church bell in a cave. Subtlety was not part of the design brief. As he enters the hall, other knights nod their greetings, mouths full of barley bread and whatever passed for cheese this side of the apocalypse. The morning meal is depressingly familiar. Hard bread, cold meat, and a suspiciously gray ale that tastes like someone dared the yeast to survive. The lord of the castle, Baron Ulrich the Bored, sits at the head table, chewing with the enthusiasm of a dying mule. He barely glances up as Osric arrives, because today is no feast day. It's training day. That means sparring matches, shouted insults, and a lot of bruises passed off as noble experience. Osric sighs and eats a chunk of salt pork so tough it could double as a shield. He washes it down with lukewarm ale and a silent prayer that nobody expects him to joust before noon. Because nothing ruins a morning quite like being knocked off a horse while still digesting questionable meat. Breakfast over, the knights shuffle toward the training yard, which is really just a muddy patch of earth surrounded by wooden fencing and poor life decisions. Squires scramble to fetch weapons, water buckets, and the occasional dropped helmet. One poor lad is currently trying to retrieve a practice sword from a very angry goose. You can feel the chill in your toes now. The grass is frozen, the mud's unforgiving, and your armor creaks in protest. You stretch your shoulders, roll your neck, and draw your training blade. A blunt iron bar designed specifically to ruin your afternoon. Cedric offers a quick, "Good luck, my lord," before backing away like someone who's seen this go badly before. Osric steps into the ring. Across from him stands Sir Roderick, 25, smug and terrifyingly sober. The two nod, raise swords, and begin. What follows is a ballet of clanging, grunting, and aggressive wheezing. Osric lands a few solid blows, but mostly he absorbs hits like a well-dressed anvil. The duel ends in a draw, largely because Osric collapses on purpose and pretends it's tactical. Back on the bench, unstrapping his gauntlets with aching hands, Osric mutters, "Glory's overrated." And somewhere behind him, a squire drops a helmet with a loud clang, as if to agree. But the day's not over. In fact, it's barely begun. There's a tournament coming, nobles arriving, and Osric's old warhorse is limping again. You'll want to rest now, because what's next involves pageantry, protocol, and a surprise inspection from the bishop. But we'll get to that later. For now, Osric slouches by the fire, cradling a dented cup of cider, and lets the ache of the morning settle into his bones. The castle hums with quiet preparation. Outside, wind howls like a gossiping monk, and within the stone walls of Grendale, the fire flickers, a brief, warm defiance against the chill of both weather and duty. Because today, you're a knight. And tomorrow? Well, you might be dinner for that goose. If there's one thing worse than getting hit in the ribs with a blunt sword before noon, it's trying to look noble while your trousers are stuck to your thighs with sweat and damp wool. Sir Osric of Grendale is now limping his way across the courtyard, muttering darkly about chafing and glory being mutually exclusive. Welcome to midday in the life of a medieval knight, where gallantry takes a firm back seat to friction burns. The courtyard is a frenzy of motion. Squires are hauling hay bales and hauling themselves up ladders with the grace of startled goats. Servants are preparing for the arrival of the visiting nobles, and by preparing, we mean scrubbing years of grime off the floor using a combination of sand, old wine, and sheer panic. A local baron is expected before sundown, and nothing causes a castle-wide existential crisis faster than the looming arrival of someone with a fancier cloak. Osric is not excited. He knows what this means: ceremonial duties, formal welcomes, possibly a poetry recital if the visiting lord's wife is in the mood, and most tragically of all, clean armor. Now, cleaning armor in 1374 is not a gentle affair. It involves sand, vinegar, a brush made of angry wire, and a squire with vengeance in his heart. Cedric is already waiting near the smithy, sleeves rolled up, face shining with the righteous fury of a teenager who spent the morning being shouted at by 3 different knights and kicked by a horse named Buttercup. Buttercup, for the record, is neither soft nor sweet. Osric removes his breastplate with a sound like an old door groaning its last prayer. Underneath, his tunic is soaked through, a patchwork of sweat, rust stains, and something that might be stew from yesterday. Cedric takes one look and says, "We'll need more vinegar." Historical curiosity pill. Vinegar and sand were common medieval cleaning agents for metal because soap was too valuable, and knights didn't care about pH balance, just shininess and not dying of tetanus. As Cedric gets to work with enthusiastic scrubbing and occasional muttering, Osric wanders into the stable. Buttercup greets him with a snort, and what may or may not be a deliberate step onto his boot. Osric pats her flank anyway. They've seen a lot together. Skirmishes, tournaments, a very unfortunate incident involving a beehive and a banner. Buttercup doesn't forget. Or forgive. "You'll need your best manners today," Osric mutters to her. She responds by sneezing directly into his face. Back outside, the castle steward is shrieking at a servant for arranging trenchers in the wrong order. Osric ignores it and heads for the well to wash his face, only to remember that the bucket rope snapped last week and no one's fixed it. So instead, he wipes his face on his sleeve, effectively just moving the dirt around. Noble. Lunch arrives in the form of a large pot of barley stew that smells vaguely edible. The stew is ladled into wooden bowls with the same urgency one might use to extinguish a fire. Osric takes his portion and joins a cluster of other knights under the covered walkway, where the wind is only slightly less aggressive. Conversation is minimal, partly because they're all exhausted, and partly because speaking while chewing this particular stew feels like tempting fate. Sir Godfrey, the oldest among them, offers a single grim chuckle. "Remember when we thought knighthood meant heroism?" Osric nods. "Turns out, it mostly means being too sore to sit and too polite to scream." "Don't forget the part about ceremonial dancing," Sir Elric adds. "That's happening tonight." Osric groans. He had forgotten. Ah, yes. The evening's entertainment. A feast and welcome for the guests, followed by a formal dance in the Great Hall. And by dance, we mean an awkward series of shuffles where armored men try not to trip over their own boots, while holding the hands of nobles' daughters, who all smell vaguely of rosewater and judgment. Back in his chamber, Osric begins preparing for the evening. This means changing into his formal surcoat, which is only marginally less uncomfortable than his armor, and trimming his beard with a small knife and immense caution. There are no mirrors, only a polished piece of metal that distorts his reflection enough to give him the face of a startled carp. He does his best. Cedric returns with the now polished armor, looking slightly haunted. "She kicked me again," he reports, referring to Buttercup. "I'll add it to her heraldry," Osric says dryly. The sun is beginning to set. Bells toll in the chapel. Servants light torches along the corridors, and the castle begins its transformation from cold stone fortress to slightly warmer stone fortress with candles. The nobles arrive, clanking, jingling, laughing too loudly. Horses stamp and snort. Velvet cloaks swirl. And Osric sighs deeply, knowing what comes next. He stands by the entrance to the hall, back straight, face expressionless. The picture of chivalry. If chivalry were limping slightly and trying not to belch stew in front of a duchess. Because in the life of a knight, heroism doesn't always involve swords. Sometimes it means enduring 3 hours of polite small talk while your feet fall asleep in your boots and someone recites a sonnet about cabbage, but that's still ahead. For now, Osric bows to the arriving guests, swallows his complaints, and steps forward into the golden torchlight, ready to represent honor, dignity, and mild indigestion. And just outside, Buttercup watches it all from her stable, plotting her next hoof-based revenge. Let's begin with the least noble truth about knighthood. Nothing makes a suit of ceremonial armor more uncomfortable than trying to sit through an entire feast in it. Sir Osric of Grendale has officially reached that point in the evening where he's forgotten what his knees used to feel like. The great hall is blazing with torches and overcrowded with people wearing more fur than a herd of bears. Banners flap gently from the rafters, displaying every nearby lord's crest, including one featuring what appears to be a terrified duck, the product of a very old family feud and a poorly translated Latin motto. Osric sits near the middle of the high table, which is both a political honor and a sensory punishment. To his left is Lady Winflade of Hartmere, who smells of expensive soap and maternal disappointment. To his right is Sir Aldrich, a man whose chewing is so loud it may qualify as a siege weapon. In front of Osric is a trencher, a stale slab of bread acting as a makeshift plate, soaking up meat juice, turnip residue, and the quiet humiliation of knowing you will absolutely eat it later, despite your best intentions. The food itself is enthusiastic. A roasted swan centerpiece stares at him with glassy eyes, its neck arched in a pose that says, "I died for this." There are stewed lentils, possibly once warm, boiled leeks, and a pie so suspiciously lumpy that several knights are betting on what's inside. So far, the leading theory is most of a rabbit and some of a shoe. Historical curiosity pill. Trencher bread wasn't just a plate. It was also a second course. After absorbing the meal's drippings, it was either eaten by the diner or handed to the poor. Think of it as edible Tupperware, with fewer hygiene concerns and more worms. As Osric picks at his food, the steward announces the evening's entertainment. The hall quiets, all except for Sir Aldrich, who continues chewing through a duck leg with the conviction of a man who fears it'll reanimate. The entertainment begins with a troupe of minstrels singing a ballad about the maiden and the moon, which turns out to be 3 verses longer than anyone expected and contains some very questionable rhymes. Then comes a juggler, who immediately drops a torch and sets part of a tapestry on fire. This is met with polite applause, because nothing says chivalry like ignoring spontaneous combustion for the sake of manners. Finally, the dancing. Osric's least favorite tradition, only slightly above ritual bloodletting and raw eel pudding. He's summoned to the center of the hall by Lady Winflade, who offers her hand with the same warmth one might extend to a passing accountant. Osric bows, takes her hand, and joins the line of knights and ladies already forming what could generously be called a dance, and more accurately described as a coordinated shuffle with sudden lunges. The music begins, a chirpy melody played on a rebec, a pipe, and something that sounds suspiciously like someone sawing a chicken in half. Osric steps left, then right, then realizes Lady Winflade has absolutely no sense of rhythm and is currently leading him in a direction last used during military retreats. Sweat trickles down the back of his neck. His boots are too tight. His partner's perfume is strong enough to classify as a weapon. And somewhere in the gallery, Cedric is watching with the smirk of a squire, who knows this will be talked about for years. Eventually, blessedly, the dance ends. Osric bows, his knees popping like overcooked peas, and makes his escape from the hall under the guise of needing fresh air. What he actually needs is to remove at least 3 layers of clothing and 2 layers of dignity. Outside, the night is mercifully cool. The stars blink above the castle like distant candles, and the courtyard is quiet except for the occasional clatter of hooves and the squawk of a guard chasing a drunk servant away from the wine barrels. Osric peels off his surcoat, loosens his belt, and leans against the stone wall with a groan that sounds vaguely ecclesiastical. Behind him, the feast drones on, full of songs, laughter, and the occasional shriek of someone discovering a chicken foot in their soup. A figure joins him in the shadows. Sir Godfrey, the elder knight, holding 2 mugs of warmed cider. "You looked like you were about to stab someone with a bread knife," Godfrey says, handing one over. "I considered it," Osric replies. "Briefly. Between the swan's accusing gaze and the cabbage pie." They drink in silence for a moment. Do you remember when we thought becoming knights meant epic quests and saving maidens? Osric asks. Godfrey chuckles. It does. Only the quests involve digging latrines, and the maidens all have opinions about turnip yields. Osric takes another sip. What do we do tomorrow? Godfrey shrugs. Drill with pikes, inspect horses, and help the steward catalog the siege ladders. Exciting stuff. Silence again. Not solemn, just familiar. This is what real knighthood looks like. Sore feet, lukewarm cider, and a quiet moment before someone shouts that the latrines are full again. As Osric stands, he hears the echo of a chant drifting through the castle windows. The end of the feast's final blessing. The night is closing, the fires are dying, and the guests are being herded toward guest chambers with the efficiency of sheepdogs in velvet. Back inside, Cedric is waiting with a look that says, I know you danced like a startled fish, and I will never let you forget it. Osric grins, despite everything, because for all the discomfort, all the rituals and gritted teeth pleasantries, there is something oddly comforting about it all. Something real, even if his back does feel like it was reassembled by a drunk mason. He heads to bed, knowing that tomorrow won't be any grander or more romantic. Just another day of duty, dense, and slightly undercooked vegetables. But for now, he's warm, full, and not wearing armor, which, in 1374, counts as a triumph. There is no alarm clock in 1374, only the clanging bell of the castle chapel, which rings just before dawn with the subtlety of a war hammer. Sir Osric of Grendale, having spent the night wedged into a straw mattress that smells faintly of damp goat, wakes up with one eye crusted shut, and the other eye wondering if it's worth reopening. His body feels like it's been politely mugged by time. His knees crack, his shoulders ache, and there's something ominously squishy in his boot. Likely a sock that gave up during the night and tried to escape. But there's no time to investigate, because today is Inspection Day. Now, Inspection Day in a medieval castle is less about neatness and more about proving to the visiting baron that the garrison could, in theory, repel an attack, or at least shout confidently while being overrun. It means the castle is a flurry of panicked activity, last-minute armor polish, and 3 different people shouting about missing pikeheads. Osric stumbles to the wash basin. The water is still icy. The soap is a lie. He does his best, which mostly involves smearing dirt from one part of his face to another. Cedric arrives moments later with his armor, a piece of bread, and what he calls good news. There's oatmeal today, the squire says, as if announcing a miracle. Osric peers into the bowl. The oatmeal is gray. It quivers ominously. It smells like old decisions. He eats it anyway, because breakfast is less about taste and more about surviving until lunch without passing out during weapons drill. Outside, the morning is brisk, damp, and entirely disrespectful. The training yard is lined with squires hauling spears taller than themselves, trying to look formidable while sneezing uncontrollably. A group of knights, Osric included, are assembled in half-armor. The ceremonial variety that gleams impressively, but offers about as much protection as a stern look. Baron Godwin, the visiting noble, arrives on a horse so large it might be part elephant. He's flanked by 4 men with matching facial hair and an air of intense disapproval. Inspection begins. The Baron says nothing at first, just walks slowly past the assembled men, hands clasped behind his back like a disappointed tutor. He stops in front of Sir Elric and prods his breastplate. "Dust," he mutters, "and rust. Charming." Historical curiosity pill. Knights spent hours maintaining their armor, but rust was nearly impossible to avoid. Oil, lard, or even pig fat, was often rubbed on chainmail to delay decay, and to ensure the wearer smelled faintly like stew. Baron Godwin continues on, arriving in front of Osric. He inspects the fit of his greaves. He frowns at a dent on the helmet. Then, without breaking eye contact, he says, "And if the Scots attacked tomorrow?" Osric thinks for a moment. "I would recommend surrendering after breakfast, my lord. They'll be in better spirits then." There's a pause. One of the mustached men behind the Baron looks horrified. But Godwin, to everyone's shock, barks a short laugh. Honesty. Very good. Stupid, but good. The inspection continues. The weapons racks are observed. The archery range is demonstrated. One of the archers hits the target. One hits the ground. One accidentally looses an arrow into the chicken coop, prompting a furious squawk and a very confused hen. After a tour of the stables, which includes Buttercup attempting to bite the Baron's horse, the inspection is declared a modest success. Everyone breathes easier, until the steward announces, "The Baron has requested a demonstration of mounted combat. This afternoon." So, there's a silence so thick you could butter it and call it dinner. Mounted combat means riding in full armor with lances, which sounds impressive until you realize most of the horses aren't fond of it. The lances weigh more than your average peasant, and the mud is just waiting to make you look foolish in front of nobility. Back in the armory, Osric gears up with the enthusiasm of a man dressing for his own humiliation. Cedric is already fetching the practice lance and muttering, "Maybe this time you'll stay on the horse." Osric glares. "I'll try not to land on you again." The sun creeps across the sky like it's trying to sneak away from responsibility. By mid-afternoon, a crowd has gathered by the tilting field. Baron Godwin and his entourage sit beneath a makeshift canopy. The local blacksmith is placing bets. A few chickens have wandered onto the edge of the field, as they always do, drawn by the faint hope of leftover grain or violence. Osric mounts Buttercup. She immediately sidesteps into a bucket and flings it halfway across the field. He tightens his grip on the reins, adjusts his lance, and nods to the marshal. The flag drops. The horses charge. There is a thunder of hooves, a clatter of metal, a collective gasp. And then, about halfway down the field, Osric's lance wobbles, Buttercup veers left, and the entire maneuver devolves into a spectacular tangle of limbs, leather, and dirt. He lands flat on his back, with a sound like a barrel falling downstairs. There is a long pause, then applause. Baron Godwin is clapping. Not politely, enthusiastically. "Excellent fall," he calls. "Very lifelike. I believed every moment." Osric lies in the mud, staring at the sky, considering the diplomatic value of never getting up again. Later, back in the stables, Cedric is brushing mud off his armor with a broom usually reserved for chimney sweeping. "You did well, my lord. You're only slightly concussed this time." Osric winces. "I aim for consistency." Evening falls. The inspection is over. The Baron leaves in good spirits. Buttercup has been placated with oats, and the kitchen has promised a dinner of something vaguely resembling meat. The day, for all its bruises and blunders, has ended in a kind of victory, the kind where no one died, and the chickens survived. Osric soaks his feet in a bucket of hot water, stares into the hearth, and mutters, "One more day of this, and then I shall retire to a monastery. Or a pub." Cedric hands him a cup of watered wine. "You say that every week." "I mean it every week." The fire crackles. The aches settle. Outside, a dog howls. Inside, peace, however temporary, returns. Because even nights need a quiet moment, especially after losing a duel to gravity. There is a specific kind of ache that settles into the bones after a full day of armor, horseback stunts, and diplomatic small talk. Sir Osric of Grendale feels every ounce of it as he eases out of bed at dawn, joints creaking like an old gate being opened by a reluctant ghost. His back has staged a quiet rebellion. His thighs feel like they've been personally insulted by the saddle, and his right foot is suspiciously numb. But at this point, Osric assumes it's just sleeping off the lance accident. Today, finally, is supposed to be a rest day. Ah, yes, the mythical rest day. The term is generous. It doesn't mean a hot bath, a good book, and a late breakfast. It means no official drills, only minor patrols, and the faint possibility of not being shouted at by a steward before breakfast. Osric, clinging to this rare mercy, like a man holding the last dry cloak in a rainstorm, heads to the chapel for morning prayers. Because even battered knights know not to anger God before coffee, or at least whatever warm barley beverage passes for coffee in 1374, inside the chapel, the air is cool and quiet. Candles flicker against stone walls, and the smell of melted wax mingles with the faint whiff of wet wool. Someone didn't quite dry their cloak last night. The chaplain mutters a few Latin blessings that no one really understands, but everyone respectfully endures. Osric kneels briefly, rises slowly, and files out with the rest of the garrison, all equally stooped and half asleep. Holiness completed, it's now time for breakfast. Breakfast is broth. Just broth. A wooden bowl of hot, vaguely oniony liquid, served with a side of hard bread that could, in a pinch, double as a roofing tile. Osric eats it while watching the sunrise over the castle yard. It's actually beautiful, in that grim, misty, medieval way. The air smells of wood smoke, hay, and the faint despair of overworked squires. Cedric joins him, looking far too awake for a boy who spent most of the week getting trampled by horses and sarcasm. "Good news," he says, handing Osric a rolled-up parchment. "Please tell me it's a pardon," Osric mutters. "No," Cedric says. "It's a message from the bishop. He's arriving today." Osric stares at him. Of course he is. Nothing ruins a rest day quite like a surprise visit from the bishop. Now, don't be misled. Bishops in 1374 aren't mild-mannered old men who bless babies and quote psalms. They are political sharks in velvet gloves. They arrive with retinues, expectations, and the ability to make or break a knight's reputation with a single passive-aggressive blessing. So the castle is thrown into yet another crisis. Flags are raised. Floors are swept. Someone is tasked with catching the cleaner-looking chickens. Osric is forced back into his formal tunic, which has somehow shrunk since last week. Or, more likely, his arms have given up the concept of sleeves entirely. When Bishop Ranulph arrives, a tall, thin man with the face of someone who has never eaten a vegetable without complaining, he surveys the castle like a disappointed parent visiting a child's dorm room. Osric greets him with a practiced bow and a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. "Sir Osric," the bishop says, "still unbroken by worldly pleasures?" "Only mildly dented, your grace," Osric replies. "The bishop is here to inspect the chapel, question the chaplain about tithes, and ensure that no one is secretly dancing on Sundays. These inspections are mostly ceremonial, but they require the entire garrison to stand around in silent reverence while the bishop scowls at candles. Hours later, because the bishop believes in long pauses between every sentence, he departs, leaving behind a faint smell of incense and ecclesiastical judgment. Osric is finally free. The afternoon brings something that, shockingly, resembles actual peace. Osric rides out with Cedric, just the two of them, under the guise of inspecting the perimeter, which, translated, means, "We're going to sit on a hill and pretend to look alert." They bring bread, cheese, and dried apples. Buttercup trots lazily through the long grass, snorting at bugs and ignoring all commands with professional indifference. They reach the crest of the hill. Below, the countryside spreads out like a damp tapestry. Farms, woods, the winding river, and the distant haze of another village too small to bother taxing. Osric dismounts and lowers himself onto a patch of moss, wincing as his spine protests. Cedric sits nearby, gnawing on a hunk of cheese the consistency of regret. "It's quiet out here," Cedric says. "For once," Osric agrees. They sit in silence for a long time. The wind moves gently through the grass. A bird chirps somewhere overhead. Even Buttercup seems momentarily at peace, chewing grass like she doesn't harbor murderous thoughts. Osric lets out a long breath. "You know," he says, "when I was younger, I thought knighthood would be grander." Cedric glances at him. "You don't think it is?" Osric shrugs. "It's muddy. It's sore. It's pretending not to cry when you get hit in the ankle with a morning star." "But you help people," Cedric says, "even if they're too busy complaining to notice." Osric smiles faintly. "Sometimes. Mostly, I just try not to fall off the horse." A pause. Then Cedric says, "You know, most boys dream of being a knight." "Yes," Osric says, looking out over the hills. "And most knights dream of being a well-fed farmer with warm feet and no enemies." And yet, he wouldn't trade it. Not the armor, not the chaos, not even the ridiculous dancing. Because for all its discomforts, its nonsense, and its deeply suspect stews, this life is real. It has weight. It has purpose. And occasionally, it even has a view like this. Back at the castle, the fires are being lit for supper. The sun slips behind the hills. The chapel bell rings once, slowly. Buttercup farts. Osric rises, dusts off his cloak, and mounts up. "Come on," he says to Cedric. "Let's go home before someone finds another inspection to schedule." They ride back in the fading light, the castle ahead like a warm bruise on the horizon. Another day done. Another notch in the armor. And tomorrow? Tomorrow they'll do it all again. With a fresh bruise, a new joke, and, if the gods are kind, slightly less oatmeal. But for now, in the stillness of dusk, Sir Osric of Grendale is just a man with a sword, a sore back, and the satisfaction of surviving yet another day as a medieval knight. The second history. Why you wouldn't last a day as a freshly knighted rookie. Picture this. You wake up to the smell of boiled onions, wet leather, and regret. Not exactly the noble perfume of chivalry, is it? Welcome to your first day as a freshly knighted rookie. Sir. Insert name here. Valiant protector of absolutely no one yet. And you've just woken up on a bed stuffed with straw, riddled with fleas, and sagging like a drunken mule. Congratulations. You're a knight now. But wait, don't stretch too much. The chainmail tunic you forgot to take off last night is still wrapped around your torso like a grumpy metal snake. You were too tired, and possibly too drunk, to remove it after last night's glorious knighting ceremony, which mostly involved your lord tapping your shoulders with a sword, followed by 6 hours of singing, shouting, and watching your Uncle Reginald throw up into a goblet of mead. You roll over. Bad idea. Your left arm is asleep, your right leg is tangled in your scabbard, and your helmet, which someone lovingly placed on your head like a party crown, has rotated sideways, blinding you in one eye. This, dear listener, is knighthood. It begins not with glory or fanfare, but with a crick in your neck and an overwhelming need to visit the latrine. Now, let's talk fashion. You attempt to peel off the mail shirt, which weighs approximately the same as a small child, and promptly realize you've developed a romantic relationship with your own sweat. The padding beneath, your gambeson, stitched from linen and stuffed with raw wool, is now a swampy, itchy sponge of chivalric suffering. It's also fused to your armpits. Removing it feels like birthing yourself out of a wet sack. You hobble to the wash basin, which is generously filled with yesterday's water and this morning's flies. Medieval bathing? A splash, a shiver, and the quiet acceptance that dirt is just part of your personality now. At least it keeps the fleas company. And breakfast? A culinary delight. 2 hunks of barley bread so tough you could reshoe a horse with them, half an onion, and a single boiled egg that might be older than your squire. He's a lad of 14 named Roger, with a lazy eye, a suspicious cough, and the personal hygiene of a goose in a thunderstorm. But he's eager. Sort of. You ask him to help tighten your sword belt. He accidentally fastens it to your leg armor. You try not to cry. Now fully dressed in your knightly attire, layers of wool, leather straps, itchy underclothes, steel on steel, and a breastplate that smells like the inside of a forgotten pantry, you step outside the barracks into the crisp morning air. The sun is rising over the castle's eastern tower, casting golden rays on the training yard. You take a deep breath of the glorious medieval morning and immediately choke on a mouthful of chimney smoke and pig manure. Because across the yard is the cookhouse belching smoke from last night's stew fire, and just to the left is the pig pen, which your lord insists be kept close to the kitchen for efficiency. Never mind the smell. That's just part of life. So is stepping in something unfortunate while trying to dodge the poultry, who roam freely because fences are for cowards. You've barely had time to adjust your chainmail when the drill master appears, Sir Bertrand the Grim, a knight so old and leathery he might actually be armor disguised as a man. He eyes you with the weary disdain of someone who's trained too many rookies and buried most of them. "Ready for your first tour of duty, Sir Rookie?" he growls, scratching at a scar that seems to shift position every time you blink. You nod bravely. Your helmet slips down over your nose. Sir Bertrand sighs the sigh of a man who already knows how this day will end. In bruises, lost dignity, and possibly a mild concussion. The first lesson of knightly life is this: you don't actually do much galloping around rescuing maidens. Your first task? Inspecting a wagon load of grain that may or may not have been tampered with by the miller's cousin. He's suspected of mixing in ground acorns again, which is apparently frowned upon. You are to stand beside the wagon, looking intimidating, while the steward scolds a peasant into confessing to economic sabotage by nut. You, of course, know nothing about grain. You're more familiar with sword polishing and how not to faint while holding a shield for too long. You squint at the sacks and nod seriously. The steward glares at the miller. The miller glares at his cousin. His cousin glares at a nearby chicken. Justice is served, possibly, but no one's sure. By noon, you've been asked to ride a patrol around the outer village, a job you expected to be grand and knightly. Instead, it involves navigating muddy paths, ducking under low-hanging branches, and nearly falling off your horse when she decides she's had enough of your inexperienced thighs. You make it back just in time for lunch. More barley bread, now enhanced with cheese that bites back. The afternoon brings sword practice. You're paired with Sir Hector, who has the gentle demeanor of a blacksmith's anvil. Within minutes, You've been disarmed, tripped, shouted at, and gently reminded that a shield is not just a fashionable square thingy. Your arms ache, your ego whimpers. As the sun dips low, your lord calls you to his hall for evening duties. You stand by his chair like a proud statue, one that occasionally itches violently beneath the armpits. The hall is noisy, filled with nobles arguing about land boundaries, a minstrel singing something suspiciously off-key, and dogs stealing sausages from unattended platters. You smile, nod, and resist the urge to fall asleep standing up. And then, finally, you are released. You shuffle to your shared quarters, peel off layers of steel, leather, and shame, and collapse onto your straw bed. You are bruised, battered, and questioning your life choices. But as the moonlight streams in through the slatted window and the sounds of snoring nights echo through the stone halls, a small part of you still feels proud. Because you survived your first day as a knight. Sort of. And tomorrow? Tomorrow you might even remember which end of the sword goes forward. At dawn, the rooster crows like it's being strangled, which it might be, given how loudly you groan in response. Every muscle in your freshly knighted body screams rebellion. Your neck has staged a coup, your thighs feel like they've been kicked by a saintly mule, and your right arm, the sword one, is currently impersonating wet bread. But duty calls, and by duty, we mean Sir Bertrand yelling from the hallway, "Get up, Sir Itchy! There's a dispute in the east pasture, and you're the closest thing we have to authority." You dress, slowly, with the grace of a man being dressed by a vengeful ghost. The gambeson is somehow heavier today, probably due to the accumulated moisture and humiliation. Your chainmail catches on your bootlaces, and your left pauldron, shoulder armor, for the uninitiated, seems to have developed a personal vendetta against your ear. Roger, your squire, is asleep in the corner, drooling into a wooden bucket. You kick his boot. He snorts, wakes up, and immediately starts fastening your belt to the wrong loop again. Progress. Once clothed, you grab your helmet, which still smells faintly of last night's onion pie, and make your way to the pasture. Now, when you imagined knighthood as a lad, you probably pictured dragons, duels, daring rescues, and majestic stallions galloping across sunrise-kissed fields. What you did not picture was mediating an argument between two angry peasants over whose cow knocked over the boundary stones. "This beast," snarls Peasant A, gripping a pitchfork with the confidence of a man who talks to turnips, "wandered into my grazing strip and trampled my cabbages." Peasant B, no pitchfork but a magnificent oozing forehead boil, scoffs. "That fence was already leaning, and your cabbages are an insult to cabbages." You, Sir Newly Knighted, sit astride your horse, trying to look wise and impartial, while also attempting to not fall off. You squint at the pasture. The cows look equally guilty. The cabbages are already flattened, possibly by nature. A third peasant appears to argue the fence is cursed and should be avoided altogether. You take a deep breath, draw your sword slowly for dramatic effect, and proclaim, "The boundary will be remarked by the steward, and the cabbages will be compensated with 3 turnips." Peasant A looks confused. Peasant B nods, impressed. The cow moos with what sounds like sarcastic approval. Is it justice? Who knows? But it's over. You return to the castle just in time for mid-morning meal, which is the same as breakfast, but somehow colder. Your bread has developed a crust so hard it could be repurposed as a shield. Roger tries to soften it with weak ale. It becomes a sponge. You eat it anyway. The rest of your morning is spent on the wall walk, a noble phrase meaning pacing along the battlements until your feet develop personality disorders. You're supposed to keep watch for raiders, messengers, and wandering salesmen with questionably legal relics. Instead, you see, one child trying to steal a pigeon, 3 washerwomen hanging suspiciously purple underclothes on a line, a dog chasing its own tail and winning. You also see Sir Oswald, a knight of some seniority, practicing his swing in the courtyard. You nod respectfully. He nods back, and then immediately walks into a low beam. Dignity is at an all-time high. By midday, word spreads of an approaching envoy. A local baron's representative is en route with a message for your lord. This, finally, is your moment. Real knightly business. You and 3 other junior knights, all equally green and slightly chafed, ride out to meet the envoy. It's a formal affair. Trumpets are polished. Tabards are brushed. You even let Roger use the good spit to shine your greaves. The envoy arrives in a cloud of dust and formality. He's on a palfrey, a well-bred riding horse, and wears robes that scream, "I have not done a day of real work in my life." His scroll is sealed with wax thicker than your shin armor. He reads, loudly, slowly, painfully. Apparently, your lord has been invited to a feast. In 3 weeks. By a baron who may or may not be trying to curry favor before tax season. Your task? Ride the message back to the castle without dropping it in a puddle. You do so. Heroically. After delivering the scroll, you are rewarded with a new assignment. Turns out, the castle's kitchen is dealing with an infestation of rats, and someone needs to guard the hallway while the cook attempts to smoke them out with sage and questionable prayers. You stand guard with your sword drawn, just in case the rats are organized. You hear a scream. It's the cook. A rat ran across his foot. You hold the door. Brave. Stoic. Sniffling slightly because the sage smoke is thick enough to summon Roman legions. Evening falls. You return to your quarters, remove your armor, this time without losing skin, and collapse onto your hay-stuffed cot. Roger is already asleep, curled around a half-eaten apple like a goblin cherub. You stare at the ceiling and reflect. Today, you did not fight in a battle. You did not rescue a maiden. You did not slay a dragon. But you did resolve a cow dispute, guard a kitchen door, and deliver a very crinkled scroll. That's knighthood. Not glamorous, not legendary, but unavoidably necessary. And somewhere in the depths of your tired chest, a tiny flicker of pride dares to exist. Tomorrow, you'll rise again. Unless the rats form a union. Somewhere between dawn and dignity, someone starts hitting a pot with a spoon outside your window. It's Roger. Your squire has taken it upon himself to invent new and horrifying alarm systems. "You said to wake you early, sir," he says, beaming proudly like a noise demon in human form. "Today's the tourney practice." You blink. Slowly. Today is, oh no, the joust. The thing knights are famous for. Long sticks, fast horses, shiny armor, dramatic music. That one. And you, fresh as a mushroom in compost, are expected to participate. Roger tosses you your undergarments. They land in your breakfast bowl, which is a generous term for the wooden cup containing yesterday's onion water and a crumb of bread. You drink it anyway. Survival tastes awful. Then comes the process of arming. Now, this is supposed to be a sacred ritual. A squire dressing his knight for combat, layer by glorious layer. In your case, it's more of a chaotic dance involving buckles, swearing, the PG medieval kind, and a gauntlet that keeps flying across the room like it's trying to escape this story. Eventually, you are dressed, in theory. Your breastplate is on sideways, your helmet is backwards, and Roger, bless his young enthusiasm, has tied your greaves, shin guards, to your elbows. You fix it, you breathe, you pray to any available saint of balance and horse control, because now it's time. The castle's tilt yard is already buzzing with activity. Local squires run errands. Younger knights practice swinging maces at stuffed dummies, all named Sir Harold for some reason. And the older knights, the real ones, sit by the stone wall chewing on meat and watching the rest of you with the smugness of men who no longer have to prove anything to anyone. You approach your horse. Her name is Beatrix. She's enormous, temperamental, and has the warm, judgmental eyes of a nun who's just caught you lying about fasting. She doesn't like nervous riders, someone says helpfully, as you attempt to mount her and immediately get stuck halfway up. But you manage it. Eventually. You are astride a war horse, wearing plate armor, holding a lance. You are, technically speaking, a knight. Unfortunately, across the field is Sir Lionel. Now, Sir Lionel is what happens when smugness breeds with noble blood. He's about your age, but unlike you, he grew up practicing jousts in his father's orchard with imported pinewood lances and 6 tutors. His hair is perfectly curled, his armor is polished to the point of threatening nearby poultry with blinding reflections. He sees you. He smirks. You sigh internally and ride into position. The joust isn't a formal one, more like practice for the Midsummer Games. But the rules are the same. 2 knights, 2 lances, 1 brief moment of speed and splinters before someone ends up on their backside. You line up, you close your visor. Your heart thumps. Beatrix snorts, and you could swear she's laughing. And then, the signal. You dig in your heels, the horse surges forward, the world narrows to the thundering of hooves and the point of your lance, aimed roughly at Sir Lionel's shiny midsection. You're almost there. Almost. And then your lance veers. You hit him, not in the chest, but just under the armpit, where his armor curves. He hits you dead center. There is a sound, like a church bell being drop-kicked. Then air. Then dirt. Then you, lying on the ground, flat on your back, listening to birds that may or may not be real. Sir Lionel reins in, turns around, and offers a hand. You have potential, he says, the same way one might compliment a damp sack of turnips. You take his hand, you rise, you nod, and you walk away with what little dignity remains clanking around inside your helmet. Roger greets you at the edge of the field. "That was amazing," he chirps. "You only flipped once." The rest of the day is a blur of minor humiliations. Your shoulder aches. Your ribs are inventing new angles. You spend an hour chasing a runaway pig that somehow ended up in the courtyard, wearing a scrap of your surcoat like it's mocking you. The pig is faster than you. It wins. By evening, you're back in the great hall, nursing a goblet of mead and your wounded pride. The room is filled with the usual castle soundtrack. Fire crackling, spoons scraping, someone hiccuping like their soul is trying to escape. Your lord raises a toast to young knights who show bravery in practice. And your name is actually mentioned. People clap. Even Sir Lionel nods once, almost respectfully. Later, in your chamber, Roger is asleep again, this time hugging your greave like it's a plush toy. You sit by the hearth and take off your boots, one by one, revealing socks that could legally qualify as weapons. And then you pause. Today, you jousted. You lost, but you didn't die. You learned how to fall, how to rise. how to smile even when someone says, "Your helmet looked like a duck's bottom from the side." This, too, is knighthood. And for the first time, it doesn't feel entirely ridiculous. You crawl into bed. The straw pokes your shoulder. A mouse is snoring in the corner. Somewhere, a pig squeals triumphantly. You smile. Tomorrow, you'll try again. And next time, you might aim higher than the armpit. You are awakened by a horn blast that sounds like someone stepped on a goose. Violently. Roger throws open the shutters, eyes wide with terror, and hair that has clearly been fighting something all night. "Bandits, sir!" he shouts. "The grain convoy never arrived. They think it was attacked." Your brain, still fogged by dreams of being knighted a second time, this time with applause and cheese, struggles to process this news. Bandits. You sit up. Adrenaline floods your chest. This is it. The moment. The very reason you became a knight. No cows, no pigs, no fence disputes. Just danger, valor, and an opportunity to maybe not fall off a horse this time. You suit up like a man possessed, except possessed by a spirit who keeps putting his boots on the wrong feet. Roger hands you your sword, backwards, but eventually you get it together and join the small group of riders assembling in the outer bailey. There are 4 of you. Sir Grimbold, the quiet one with the nose like a saddle horn. Sir Petwin, the one who talks too much and hasn't won a fight since 1308. Lady Marjorie, fierce, competent, and the only one who looks genuinely excited, and you. Sir Bertrand gives you a grim nod. Go find the convoy. Escort it home. If you find the bandits, he shrugs. Don't die. Excellent leadership. So off you ride, through mist and muck, hooves squelching through the damp spring earth, armor clanking like a traveling smithy. The countryside is quiet, too quiet, which is never what you want when you're supposedly tracking armed thieves. Hours pass. You see 1 deer, 2 squirrels, and a merchant cart selling questionable sausage on a stick. No bandits, no convoy. Then, just as you're beginning to suspect the whole thing was a false alarm or a particularly aggressive grain delay, Lady Marjorie calls out, "There!" You round a bend and find the cart. It's not great. 2 oxen, 1 dead, 1 wheel broken. A scattering of flour bags torn open like someone held a knife fight in a bakery. The cart driver, a man of advanced years and alarming eyebrows, sits tied to a tree, muttering curses at a squirrel that may or may not be real. You dismount heroically, then immediately trip over your own scabbard and land in a bush. Fortunately, the others are too busy questioning the driver to notice. "Bandits," he says, spitting flour. 3 of them. Took the coins, tore up the cart, left me tied like a ham. "Which way did they go?" asks Sir Grimbold. The man shrugs. "Into the woods. Looked like amateurs, though. One tripped over his own sword. Nearly took his mate's foot off." You mount up again and follow the tracks into the forest, which is dense, dark, and full of brambles that seem personally offended by your armor. The next hour involves being smacked in the face by at least 4 branches, watching Sir Petwin walk directly into a spiderweb and scream like a noblewoman discovering rats in her pantry, listening to Lady Marjorie quietly suggest, "Next time, maybe we bring a map?" Eventually, you find them. The bandits. All 3, camped near a stream, roasting something that looks suspiciously like boot leather. They're young, probably just desperate villagers turned desperate thieves, and clearly not expecting company. You discuss strategy. Lady Marjorie votes for stealth. Sir Grimbold votes for direct combat. Sir Petwin votes for talking it out over sausage. You, as the lowest-ranking knight, are unanimously volunteered to sneak closer and count how many of them are actually armed. You nod. Brave. Bold. Slightly nauseous. You creep forward, armor creaking gently like the saddest tree in the wind. You step on a stick. It snaps loudly, echoing like thunder. One bandit looks up. You freeze. He squints. You pretend to be a shrub. He shrugs and sits back down. Eventually, you make it back to the group. 3, you whisper. One has a dagger. One has a stick. One is asleep. Excellent, says Lady Marjorie. Time to be terrifying. The plan is simple. You charge in together, yelling like madmen. It works better than expected. The bandits scream, drop their leathery dinner, and bolt into the woods like startled deer. Except the third one, the sleepy one, wakes up too late and promptly runs into a tree. You tie him up and carry him back to the cart, where the old driver is delighted to see at least one of them arrested, the lazy rascal. He proceeds to throw a handful of flour at the poor lad, for emphasis. By sundown, you've helped fix the broken wheel, shared some very dusty turnips with the driver, and escorted the cart back to the castle. No one cheers. There are no minstrels. No maidens throw flowers. But the steward claps you on the shoulder and says, "Well done, sir." "Eh? You? Keep this up, and we might let you guard the wine cellar." You sleep that night with sore legs, a flour-stained tabard, and the mild satisfaction of having technically defeated a bandit. Even if that bandit's greatest threat was a poorly whittled stick. You're no hero, but you are useful. And in the world of castles, lords, and loud geese, that's saying something. You wake up with something warm pressed against your cheek. For a moment, you think it's Roger delivering breakfast in bed. It is not. It's the ferret. Again, the castle ferret, officially named Sir Whiskers by the cook's niece and unofficially known as the demon sausage thief by everyone else, has returned to your chamber and claimed your boot as his bed. You don't question it. You let him have it. That boot's been soaked, crushed, and bitten by 3 animals and 1 knight already. At this point, it's more symbolic than functional. Today is the feast. Not just any feast, a real one. Your lord's birthday. Nobles from nearby manors are arriving with gifts, servants, and expressions of polite dread. Tapestries are being aired. The dogs have been forcibly washed. A juggler has been hired. And not the bad juggler either. The slightly better one who only drops the knives half the time. The entire castle is in a panic. You, as a knight of recent and still questionable status, have been given a very important task. Stand still and look impressive. Yes, your job today is to loiter like a living statue beside the Lord's chair, adorned in ceremonial armor so polished it reflects your every insecurity. It's the sort of role given to someone the steward isn't sure can handle anything involving moving parts or livestock. Roger helps you into your cleanest tunic, which smells faintly of vinegar and triumph. Your chainmail gleams. Your surcoat bears your lord's crest, a red boar rampant over a field of slightly confused yellow. You look, to put it plainly, like someone who might eventually know what they're doing. By midday, the Great Hall is a cacophony of clinking goblets, barking hounds, and someone trying to tune a lute using only guesswork and faith. You take your place at the dais. Nobles arrive and nod at you with vague recognition, unsure whether you're a real knight or just an unusually decorative candle holder. You stand tall, still, silent. And then the troubadour begins his song. It's long, very long. It includes verses about your lord's glorious hunting expeditions, his generosity to widows, and one regrettable metaphor involving a swan and a wheel of cheese that no one quite understands. You don't move, not even when the fire behind you starts to smoke, not even when Sir Petwin sneezes violently into his goblet. But then, a new verse begins, and to your horror, it's about you. The troubadour, apparently short on material, has heard tales of the young knight who bravely faced 3 fearsome bandits, one of whom, as we all remember, defeated himself via tree trunk. The song greatly exaggerates your heroism. There is talk of 12 foes, flaming arrows, possibly a dragon. Your ears turn red inside your helmet. But then, the laughter fades, because outside a horn sounds, and it's not the festive kind. Everyone pauses. The steward rushes in, white-faced and breathless. "Fire!" he gasps. "In the grain store!" The Lord bolts up. So do you. Because suddenly, you're in charge. Most of the knights are drunk, singing or arguing with a cheese platter. Sir Bertrand is off somewhere judging a pudding contest. Sir Lionel is trying to impress a baroness with his poetry. So it falls to you. You gather a handful of stable hands, Roger, and Lady Marjorie, who is very calmly wrapping a linen around her hair and muttering, "About time something happened." The grain store is indeed on fire. Not a great fire, more of an enthusiastic smolder, but enough to ruin the grain if left unchecked. The culprit is found quickly. A tipped lantern, left by someone who just wanted to see if rats could climb ladders. You grab buckets. You form a line. You order someone to wet down the adjacent thatch. You swing open the rear shutters to vent the smoke. Lady Marjorie kicks the door off its hinges for dramatic effect, and probably just for fun. And together, you put it out. The grain is saved. Mostly. You smell like smoke and dignity. The Lord, having recovered from the shock, pats your back so hard your lungs reconsider their position. "Well done, sir." He squints. "Sir. Yes. You. Good lad." You nod. You smile. You try to suppress a cough caused by inhaling roughly 12 cubic feet of scorched oat dust. Back in the hall, the feast resumes. This time, you're not standing guard. You're seated at the lower end of the table, between a traveling monk and a woman who may or may not have tried to poison her last husband. You're served roast chicken, 2 whole turnips, and a thick slab of barley pudding that looks like masonry, but tastes like modest triumph. Roger beams at you from across the room. He's wearing your spare boot on his head and trying to teach the ferret how to bow. You raise your goblet. No one sees you. No one cheers. But for the first time since you were awkwardly knighted in an overly long ceremony involving a misfired trumpet, you feel like a knight. Not because you fought a battle, not because you won a joust, but because today people needed something done, and you did it. You, Sir Slightly Sooty of house, mostly functional. As the fire crackles and the ferret attempts to steal someone's pudding, you lean back and exhale slowly. Knighthood isn't glory. It isn't fame. It's showing up, swinging a bucket, holding a line, keeping the fire from spreading, and remembering which end of the lance goes forward. Most of the time. Sleep well, brave rookie. You've earned it. The third history is why you wouldn't last a day as an aging knight on his final campaign. The first thing Sir Aldrich feels when he wakes isn't the icy wind. It isn't even the ache in his left knee, which has been clicking like a disgruntled carpenter's hinge since the siege of Caen. No, the first thing he notices is that someone has stolen his boot. Just the one. Right foot. Gone. Now you may imagine that a knight of nearly 60 winters, a living relic of 3 minor crusades and 1 major family scandal, might take this inconvenience with grace. You'd be wrong. Instead, Sir Aldrich growls like a bear caught in a snare and shoves aside his wool blanket, which smells strongly of damp goat and moderately of urine. You are now inside a campaign tent in the year 1383. It's still dark, not because it's early, but because medieval mornings weren't exactly known for sunrise yoga and gentle lattes. The tent flap rattles with the wind, flapping like the wings of an oversized moth that's been drinking too much ale. Outside lies the English camp, a smattering of lopsided tents, cook fires barely clinging to life, and a soundscape of coughing, swearing, and the distant retching of someone discovering last night's rabbit stew was mostly squirrel. Aldrich grunts. His squire, Osmond, is nowhere to be seen. This is unsurprising. Osmond is 17, has all the survival instincts of a stunned pheasant, and possibly believes armor polishes itself. Yesterday, he set his own sleeve on fire while trying to dry his leggings. Aldrich isn't sure whether to knight him or strangle him. The missing boot turns out to be under his cot. Soaked, of course. He slides it on anyway. A knight doesn't have time for dignity. Not when breakfast consists of stale trench bread and something called salted meat, which could be horse or could be hope. Either way, it's chewy. As Aldrich lurches out into the camp, the mud tries to eat his other boot. This is the kind of mud that remembers the Roman legions and still holds a grudge. It clings to everything with the tenacity of a peasant demanding back pay. Now, take a deep breath. Smell that? That's the scent of an army on campaign. Damp wool, human fatigue, old cheese, and the faint metallic tang of impending doom. This isn't the glorious chivalric warfare the bards sing about. This is the 100 Years' War, or, as the soldiers call it, the never-bleeding ends war. And Sir Aldrich has seen enough campaigns to know this one will be like all the others. Miserable, muddy, and probably ending with dysentery. A trumpet blows. Not a clear, triumphant fanfare, more of a melancholic honk, like a goose with asthma. That's the signal for assembly. He trudges toward the field where the other knights gather, their armor half-buckled and expressions ranging from exhausted to existentially offended. These men were once young. Well, some still are, full of bravado and hymns about honor. Now they mostly talk about gout. Sergeant Bertrand, who once took a crossbow bolt to the thigh and decided pants were optional thereafter, barks something unintelligible about movement orders. They're marching at noon, assuming the wagons haven't gotten stuck again, or the bridge hasn't collapsed like last time. Sir Aldrich sighs. His joints protest. His horse, bless its flea-ridden soul, is probably already chewing through someone else's tent. You may think that, as a knight, Aldrich rides gloriously into battle, banners flying. Ha! No, not anymore. The reality is closer to hoist yourself into a saddle while your hip screams, wave vaguely in the direction of France, and hope the lice haven't nested in your helmet. Speaking of which, his helmet, a lovingly dented bassinet that still bears a smear of someone's blood from last spring, is currently being used by Osmond as a cooking pot. He finds the boy crouched beside the embers, enthusiastically boiling what may once have been an onion. "By St. Cuthbert's knuckles, what are you doing?" Aldrich bellows. Osmond jumps, spilling onion water down his front. "Breakfast, my lord." "In my helmet? You said it needed seasoning." This is not a bonding moment. Eventually, Aldrich retrieves his armor, dons it with the usual grunts and groans, and contemplates his day. There will be marching. There will be rain. There will be villagers with pitchforks pretending they're not hiding their best pigs. And if they're truly unlucky, there might even be a skirmish. But here's the thing about aging knights. They've seen it all. The burning fields, the screaming horses, the way boys like Osmond go pale at the first arrow and try to hide behind their shields like turtles with poor planning. And Aldrich? He just keeps going. Because there's no pension for knights, no retirement banquet, no honor guard of grateful kings. There's just one more march, one more mud-drenched campaign, and the faint hope that, if he doesn't die of plague or politics, someone will someday remember that once, long ago, Sir Aldrich of Barham rode into battle with more courage than sense. He adjusts his belt, sighs, and mutters to Osmond, "Fetch the horse, and if I find another vegetable in my helmet, I'm feeding you to the archers." The wind whistles. Somewhere in the distance, a crow caws. Ominous, of course. It always is, and so begins his final day. But what happens that evening, in a broken village just over the ridge, will turn everything on its head. By mid-morning, the sky has already taken a personal interest in ruining everyone's life. Thick, wet clouds press down over the English encampment like a damp woolen sock someone's been wearing since last Easter. Rain isn't falling yet, but it's thinking about it very seriously. Sir Aldrich of Barham, age 58 and a half, gives his armor one last tug and swings into the saddle. There's a familiar chorus of joints cracking like kindling. His horse, a gray gelding named Wretch, short for God's wretched mistake, flicks its ears back as if to say, "We're doing this again, are we?" Now, let's set the scene. The column of soldiers is winding out of camp in what might generously be described as formation, but realistically looks more like a disorganized funeral procession. Archers trudge along with bows slung across their backs. Squires trip over bedrolls, and someone near the back is still arguing with a cook over the price of yesterday's moldy cheese. All standard fare for a 13th century campaign. They're headed toward a nameless hamlet, one of those weary little villages tucked into a fold of the French countryside, where the roofs sag like sad eyebrows, and the chickens look like they've seen things. Rumors say there's a storehouse there, or maybe a few pigs left unslaughtered. Either way, command has decided it needs to be secured, which is medieval military code for take what you can, and please try not to burn everything this time. Aldrich rides alongside Sir Emery of Crickhollow, a younger knight with the sunlit optimism of someone who still thinks war has rules. He's chattering about battle plans, troop spacing, and the importance of morale. Aldrich nods politely, but mentally files it all under well-meaning nonsense. He knows what's coming. He's seen it in Gascony, in Brittany, and that one time outside Dijon when half the unit got food poisoning from bad eel pie. This village will be terrified, underfed, and mostly defenseless. The pigs will be hidden. The villagers will cry. And the soldiers, bored, wet, and sore, will get over-enthusiastic. There will be looting. Possibly fire. Definitely a lot of shouting. By midday, the rain arrives. Naturally. Not a dramatic thunderstorm, mind you. Just a relentless, damp drizzle that soaks through chainmail, squelches under boots, and adds a pleasing mildew crust to everything it touches. Osmond, the squire, is clinging to Wretch's saddle, looking like a partially drowned turnip in armor 2 sizes too big. "Sir," he squeaks, "are we the good guys?" Aldrich doesn't answer right away. That's the thing about being a knight in your twilight years. The stories you told yourself, about honor, valor, noble causes, start to sound suspiciously like excuses. He remembers his first campaign, bright-eyed and freshly anointed, galloping into battle behind a banner embroidered by his mother. Now the banner is long gone, the embroidery unraveled, and the only thing galloping is his horse, when it smells fire. He leans forward slightly in the saddle. "Depends who's asking, lad." They reach the village an hour later. It's exactly what Aldrich expected, and somehow worse. The houses are little more than wooden boxes with thatched lids, their walls warped from decades of weather and resignation. Smoke curls from a few hearths, cautious and thin. Children peer out from behind doors. Dogs slink away. And the silence that greets the soldiers is not reverent. It's calculating. The commanding officer, a portly knight named Sir Ulrich, who leads primarily through volume and indigestion, raises a mailed hand. "Secure the village," he shouts, which in field terms roughly translates to "scatter wildly and do what you want until I need someone to blame." The men dismount. A few begin poking around for food or valuables. One particularly enthusiastic archer finds a small barrel of something fermented and starts singing. Sir Emery heads straight for the village church, probably to ensure the altar cloths haven't committed treason. Aldrich remains on horseback, watching, because something isn't right. It's too quiet, too neat. No signs of panic, no rush to hide food, no chickens under the floorboards. Just stillness, like the village is holding its breath. Osmond tugs on his sleeve. "Sir, that cart over there, isn't that... why would there be caltrops under a hay cart?" Aldrich's eyes narrow. He rides closer. Sure enough, a few rusty caltrops, spiked iron stars designed to lame horses and pierce boots, peek out from beneath the cart's edge. And suddenly, everything snaps into place. This village isn't helpless. It's bait. A shout erupts from the tree line. Crossbow bolts hiss through the air. One thuds into the side of Wretch, who does not appreciate this at all and promptly throws Aldrich into the nearest mud puddle. The ambush is quick, brutal, and terrifyingly well coordinated. French militia, ragged but determined, pour from the forest with farm tools, old armor, and murder in their eyes. The English soldiers, caught mid-plunder and mid-sausage, panic. Some fight back, some try to flee, most just flail. Aldrich hauls himself upright, soaked, furious, and temporarily bootless again. Wretch has vanished. He draws his sword, which feels heavier than it used to. A younger man might charge into the fray. Aldrich picks his target carefully. A French militiaman lunges at him with a pitchfork. Aldrich sidesteps, kicks the man's knee, and sends him sprawling. Another swings a scythe. Aldrich parries, twists, and brings the hilt down hard. Not killing, just stopping. He's not here to be a hero. He's here to survive. And survive he does. Barely. By the time the sun begins to set, the English are routed. The French, or rather, the peasants masquerading as French fighters, melt back into the forest, leaving behind a field of groaning soldiers and some very smug chickens. Sir Aldrich leans against a fence post, breathing like a bellows. That's when he sees her. A woman, perhaps 50, cloaked and calm, watching him from the edge of the trees. Her expression is unreadable. Not frightened, not angry, just measuring. He nods once. She turns and disappears into the woods. Aldrich straightens. His back protests. His pride does too. Osmond stumbles up, bleeding from one ear and clutching a dented helmet. "We lost," he says, as if Aldrich hadn't noticed. "No," Aldrich replies, looking toward the tree line. "We learned." He doesn't say what. That night, they sleep in the rain-soaked ruins of someone else's dinner plans. And tomorrow, something changes, but not the way anyone expects. By dawn, the camp is quiet, in the way only a thoroughly humiliated army can be. There's no breakfast chatter, no clatter of armor being buckled with any particular enthusiasm, just the slow rustling of soldiers who are trying to forget that yesterday they were bested by a group of peasants with gardening tools and one particularly effective goose. Sir Aldrich wakes up with a rock embedded in his shoulder and the creeping sensation that his left leg no longer belongs entirely to him. He shifts beneath his damp cloak, grimacing. Osmond is snoring under the collapsed remains of what used to be a cooking tripod. Wretch, astonishingly, has returned, chewing cud beside a pile of discarded helmets as if nothing happened. Now, imagine being nearly 60, wrapped in wet wool, sleeping on a battlefield where last night's dinner still smells faintly of regret, and still needing to be the leader, the one the young knights glance at when they think no one's looking, the one who has to pretend his sword arm doesn't feel like it's been replaced with a sack of turnips. Aldrich stands slowly, the kind of slow that announces, "I'm too old for this, and I'm going to make sure the universe knows." A few soldiers nod as he passes. Others avoid his gaze. No one speaks of the ambush. In medieval campaign etiquette, if you don't talk about the defeat, perhaps it never happened. Much like noble debts, and the last time someone tried to clean the latrine pit. The plan, if you can call it that, is to regroup, fall back, reassess strategic priorities. That's what Sir Ulrich called it this morning, before coughing up what looked suspiciously like half a lung. Aldrich, however, has different priorities. You see, something about yesterday unsettled him. Not the ambush itself. He's been ambushed in 5 languages. But that woman, standing at the edge of the trees, calm as a saint and twice as silent. That wasn't random. She knew exactly what was coming. So he sets off, alone, much to Osmond's horror. With the kind of stubborn gait only possessed by knights who've been kicked by both war and horses and decided they're still in charge. The forest is wet and quiet, the sort of quiet that sticks to your teeth. Every step squelches. Every branch tries to slap him. Somewhere above, a bird is laughing. Aldrich ignores all of it. He's following tracks, faint boot prints here and there, where someone knew just how to walk without being seen by idiots in metal trousers. Eventually, he finds it. A clearing. Small, neat, and completely unexpected. Not a camp exactly. More like a gathering point. Scattered baskets, a half-built cook fire, and the remains of what was clearly a strategy meeting over stale bread and angry whispers. No soldiers, just farmers who'd had enough. And someone had organized them. Someone with discipline. And there, sitting by the fire, calmly stitching up a tear in her cloak, is the woman. She's older, maybe his age, maybe younger, if the sun's been cruel. Her hands are rough, her face lined. But her eyes are the sort that have measured people and decided most of them weren't worth the trouble. She looks up. "You're either very brave," she says, "or very stupid." "Most days, I manage to be both," Aldrich replies, wiping mud from his surcoat. "Yesterday, I was merely slow." She doesn't laugh. Instead, she gestures to a stump. He sits. The conversation that follows isn't loud. It isn't angry. It's two people who have spent their lives serving causes they no longer believe in, finally speaking without banners, without armor, just voices, cracked by time. Her name is Margot, once the daughter of a minor knight, married off at 16. widowed by raiders at 20. Her village razed, rebuilt, razed again. Eventually, she decided that perhaps being quiet wasn't the path to survival after all. She talks of the shifting tides of war, how lords fight over land they've never seen, while villagers bleed into the soil they've farmed for generations. Of children taught not to play, but to hide. Of soldiers who take tax in livestock, grain, and dignity. And Aldrich listens, because everything she says he's seen, from the other side of the sword. He's burned villages under royal banners. He's led charges into towns defended by broomsticks and desperation. He's told himself it was for the king, for the crown, for peace. But peace never came. Only another campaign. "You know," he says slowly, "we were told your people were hoarding grain meant for the English garrison." "We were," she shrugs. "It's called eating." He chuckles. It hurts his ribs. And there, beside the fire, something shifts. Not an alliance, not a truce, just understanding. The kind that doesn't need parchment or seals. Aldrich rises. "I'll tell them you're gone," he says, "that the villagers scattered." "You'll lie." "I'll simplify." She nods. And that's it. No handshake. No dramatic departure. Just a quiet moment between two people who once believed in flags and now believe in getting through winter. As he trudges back through the woods, Aldrich doesn't feel victorious. He doesn't feel defeated either. He feels tired. But not the tired of aching limbs. The tired of carrying something too long. When he reaches the camp, Osmond runs up, panicked. "Sir, we thought you'd been killed." "Not today," Aldrich mutters. Then louder, "Tell Sir Ulrich the village is empty. No supplies, nothing worth taking." "But what about—" "Nothing," he says, with a tone that suggests questioning him further might result in a lesson involving a belt and bad grammar. That night, the army moves on. And somewhere in the woods, a woman sharpens a hoe like it's a sword and tells her people they've earned another day. Just one more. And tomorrow, well, tomorrow brings something else entirely. By now, the campaign is officially off script. The orders were to advance inland, secure 3 villages, seize their winter stores, and remind the French countryside that the English crown still had teeth, albeit increasingly yellowed, crooked ones. But after the fiasco with the ambush, the general mood among the men is less glorious conquest and more soggy attrition. Sir Aldrich, for his part, is no longer playing along. Oh, he's still here, still waking up under a damp tarp that smells like boiled leather and bad decisions. Still buckling his armor with the same groaning ritual that now requires the assistance of Osmond, a tent pole, and at least one whispered prayer to Saint Leonard, patron saint of aching joints and losing gracefully. But something has shifted. He's quieter now. Not brooding, just processing. You see, Aldrich has spent a lifetime trusting that loyalty was its own reward, that service to one king after another would, at some vague future point, add up to something meaningful. Maybe a manor, a coat of arms, a song, if the bard was especially bored. But now, it's mud, frostbite, and the creeping realization that he's become background noise in someone else's history. Still, routine persists. The soldiers are told to march again. They pack their tents, scrape the crust from their helmets, and shuffle forward, like disgruntled pilgrims in search of a disappointment shrine. Today's destination? A bridge. Just a bridge. Stone, moss-covered, spanning a sleepy river that's more puddle than strategic asset. But apparently it's important because someone decided to write it down on a very official-looking scroll that smells faintly of wax and lies. As the column approaches the river, Aldrich lingers behind, letting the younger knights ride ahead, all shining plate and insecure facial hair. He watches them gallop with the optimism of those who've never been punched by a mule or betrayed by a treaty. At the river's edge, everything bottlenecks. The wagons get stuck. Horses refuse to cross. A shouting match breaks out between a cook and a quartermaster over whose goat is currently standing in the soup cauldron. Standard operating chaos. And then Aldrich sees it. Across the bridge, just beyond the mist, a figure. A single rider, motionless, watching. No banner, no entourage, just a tall silhouette astride a dark horse, face obscured, presence deliberate. Now, you've read enough stories to expect that this rider is either a herald of doom or the ghost of someone Aldrich once wronged. But this is not that kind of story. Not quite. He narrows his eyes. "Friend of yours?" Osmond asks, squinting like the sun owes him money. "No," Aldrich murmurs, "but not a stranger either." Because he recognizes the posture, the way the figure sits in the saddle, straight-backed but relaxed. That's no peasant. That's training. That's experience. That's someone who's ridden into a charge, survived, and learned not to brag about it. The rider turns and disappears into the fog. Gone. The soldiers don't notice. The bridge is finally clear, and the column begins to shuffle across. Boots squelching, hooves clattering. Sir Ulrich bellows something about vigilance, but his voice is mostly drowned out by someone coughing up phlegm and a donkey expressing deep existential angst. Aldrich rides on, mind ticking. That figure wasn't French, not local militia. No one flies solo in a war zone unless they're either mad, dead, or making a point. By dusk, they reach the other side of the river and set camp near a grove of skeletal trees that look like they're trying to escape the ground. The wind is picking up, the kind that finds the gaps in your armor and whispers cold regrets down your spine. Aldrich sits by the fire, sharpening his sword out of habit more than need. The blade is old. Like him. Still functional, but no longer trying to impress anyone. Osmond is nearby, trying to cook something he insists is a turnip, though it smells suspiciously like boiled sock. Then the message comes. A rider, young, pale, breathless, gallops into camp and slides from his horse with the grace of a sack of barley. He carries a sealed letter, the kind with ribbon and wax and the vague aura of "You're not going to like this." It's addressed to Aldrich. He opens it with the edge of his blade. The contents are brief. Sir Aldrich of Barham, Knight Banneret, in service to the Crown of England, you are summoned to appear before the Earl by sunrise to explain the circumstances surrounding the failed action at Ville-du-Bois and your subsequent unauthorized absence from formation. Your conduct will be reviewed. Signed by order of the Field Marshal. There it is, the sword of bureaucracy, sharper than steel, colder than the river. Osmond peers over his shoulder. That bad? They've noticed I went for a walk, Aldrich replies flatly. What will you tell them? He stares into the fire. That, maybe we're not the good guys anymore. A beat. Sir, Osmond says quietly, were we ever? Aldrich doesn't answer, because deep down, he knows that chivalry died years ago, somewhere between the third famine and the fourth time he saw a knight stab a baker over a crust of bread. But still, something stubborn flickers in him. Not pride, not even defiance, just the quiet, grizzled refusal to be remembered as another man who knew better, and did nothing. So he stands. Polish my armor, he tells Osmond. Best we look our finest for the Inquisition." "You're really going to tell them off?" "No," Aldrich says, strapping on his sword. "I'm going to tell the truth." He walks into the darkness toward the command tent, but behind him, the wind shifts, and far to the north, across the bridge, someone else rides. A figure cloaked not in armor, but in memory. And they're heading this way. By the time Sir Aldrich reaches the command tent, the wind has turned traitor. It slices through the camp like a blade made of ice and spite, flapping every tent like a drunk flag waver on St. Crispin's Day. The soldiers huddle tighter around their fires. Sentries pace faster. Somewhere, a kettle has given up and is whistling its death song. Aldrich doesn't hurry, because this isn't a trial. It's a performance. Inside the largest pavilion, the kind of canvas monstrosity held up by poles, ropes, and military self-importance, the Earl of Crowthorne waits like a gouty spider in a silk cocoon. He's seated on a traveling chair with actual armrests, flanked by 2 knights who haven't seen mud in at least a week and carry the smug posture of men who believe boots are for servants. "Sir Aldrich," the Earl begins, adjusting his fur-lined mantle, even though everyone knows it's mostly rat. "My lord," Aldrich replies, with a nod that balances just on the edge of disrespect. "You were observed departing camp during yesterday's engagement and not returning until nightfall. You missed your assigned position in the formation. Your squire tells us you were taking a stroll." There's a pause. The tent rustles like it's holding its breath. "I went to see the people we attacked," Aldrich says calmly, "to see what we'd left behind." That earns him a silence, the uneasy kind. Even the wind seems curious. "You disobeyed orders," one of the flanking knights mutters. "I showed initiative," Aldrich counters. "Something you'd recognize if you'd ever been further than 5 miles from a wine cart." The other knight stiffens. The Earl waves them down. "Let's not descend into insult, Sir Aldrich. We've all served. We've all sacrificed. But discipline must be preserved." He leans forward. "This campaign cannot survive sentiment." And there it is, the truth, dressed in politics. This war, like all wars, doesn't want knights who think. It wants hammers, polished, armored hammers who do what they're told, regardless of the faces on the other end of the swing. Aldrich folds his hands behind his back. "Then you don't need me." The silence is longer this time, thicker. "You're resigning?" the Earl asks, incredulous. "No, I'm refusing." "You can't do that." "I just did." And for the first time in 20 years, Aldrich turns his back on command without waiting for permission. They don't call after him. They don't try to stop him. Because no one ever taught them what to do with a knight who's no longer afraid. The next morning, he's gone. Not vanished. Not spirited away. Just not present. Osmond wakes to find the tent half-packed, a note on the saddlebag, and a small bag of coins that smells like old leather and worse choices. The note is short. "Osmond, be better than I was. Keep both boots. If you're lucky, you'll live long enough to wonder why we did any of it. Aldrich." And with that, Sir Aldrich of Barham rides north. Not toward glory, not toward home, just away. Through woods still whispering about ambushes. Past the village that no longer fears him. Across the same stone bridge, now just a bridge again, no longer a symbol of anything at all. He rides slowly. Not because he's weak, but because he finally can. He passes a shepherd who doesn't bow. A girl with a basket who offers him an apple and doesn't ask his name. A dog who runs alongside him for 3 miles, then peels off, unconcerned. And at sunset, he reaches a ridge. From there, he sees the valley below, peaceful, untouched, unclaimed. A place where no banners fly, no horns blare, and the only sound is the wind brushing through the grass like an old friend. He dismounts, removes his helmet, and breathes. For the first time in decades, there's no weight on his shoulders, no chain of command, no looming siege, just the aching, liberating truth that he has survived every lie that knighthood ever told him. Back at the camp, Osmond becomes a squire without a knight, which, oddly, makes him the most popular man in the company. He sharpens swords, cooks bland stew, and begins writing letters for the men who can't. His handwriting is atrocious, but his spelling is oddly philosophical. When asked what happened to Sir Aldrich, he just shrugs. Said he was going to find the part of the world that didn't ask him to kill anyone. And for a moment, everyone's quiet. Because even in the chaos of endless war, the thought of someone just leaving, not as a deserter, not as a coward, but as a man who's finished, feels like rebellion in its purest form. Somewhere, weeks later, Margot receives a helmet by courier. Inside it, a single turnip, carefully carved with a crude smile. She doesn't laugh, but she does keep it by her fire. Until spring, and that's the end. Of the night, of the campaign, of the story. Or at least, the part anyone remembers. Because in a world built on glory, it's rare to find the ones who walked away. But sometimes, those are the only ones who truly lived.